What's up, everyone? Welcome to this week's edition of the Football Goons podcast. Fresh off the Thanksgiving holiday and way overeating, at least on my part, we're back and ready to get you focused for the fantasy football playoffs. I'm sure that for some, you've already, started your playoffs essentially, as if you're like me, every single game is necessary to get in at this point. So you may be in advanced playoffs, as I like to call them, to make myself feel better, or you could be sitting back waiting to see how your matchups are going to play out. Regardless, everybody can use some additional 411 to get themselves ready for a championship run. All right, guys, episode 87 here, and I got to say, none of us have ever been benched for Geno Smith on this podcast. All right, so the obvious question here is
I watched Geno Smith get benched Fitzpatrick. So ipso facto, vis-a-vis, does that mean Ryan Fitzpatrick is now better than Eli Manning? Is that what this means?
I think in a roundabout way, I'll accept it.
Yeah, I think it just circles the wagons at this point.
Yeah, so look, obviously the breaking news this afternoon was Eli Manning. I didn't really have it, put through here in the agenda because by the time that the news came out, obviously we were kind of set where we were going. But just a quick thought on this from you guys, like this obviously means that the Giants are moving on, right, at this point?
It has to.
Well,
I mean, I just feel like why do it if I mean, it's clear that I guess they're trying to see what they have in Geno or Davis Webb. They're drafting a guy in the top 5, no matter what happens here. I don't understand it at all. And I say that as a documented Eli hater, but it makes no sense. Like, yeah. I read a headline that, hey, the Giants are tanking. They benched Eli. They're 2-9. Like, he's not helping them win games.
Yeah, I think the tank is already parked.
Right. I just feel like, again, I'm a documented Eli hater, but you owe him more than this. You owe him not benching him.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of slimy, and it's very appropriate with the way that Ben McAdoo, looks on the sideline every week that something slimy happens here. But, just organizationally, like a couple of years ago, you feel like this is the Giants organization would never, pull off a stunt like this. And all of a sudden, like, they're kind of seeing this rebuild on the horizon. And I think that they're in a little bit of a panic mode. And I think that for some silly reason, they're trying to see, hey, do we have next year's backup on the roster? When really, like, that should be the last thing in your mind. Like, just let him get the next 4 starts and then peacefully move on at that point.
You know what? Like, on one hand, I'm totally in agreement with this because as a franchise that's always been looking for a quarterback, like, isn't that what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to find out if I don't think they think for 1 second Geno is the future, but like, what if this is their opportunity to find out if Davis Webb is the future now? If not, then you have to address it with your first round pick next year, especially with the crop of quarterbacks that's supposed to be coming out. Like, I understand like the whole disrespectful thing to Eli thing, but I had this conversation with somebody on Facebook earlier. They said they would never do this to Favre. They would never do this to Montana. They would never do this to this one or that one or that one. None of those guys have ever hit the cliff that Eli Manning has hit. Like, Eli's not just playing bad football for Eli. Eli's playing god-awful football. And I know there's no running game. I know there's no line. And I know the receivers are hurt. And the defense isn't playing up to where it should be last year. But, like, Hall of Fame quarterbacks are supposed to be better than this. You know what I mean? So, like, this is unfortunately for Eli a perfect storm. But now the Giants have to make a huge decision of, like, where are we going from here? And you can't wait until you draft a quarterback next year to find out that Davis Webb might be the real deal for you. And then now you've drafted a quarterback and now you have too many. Like, that's just my opinion. Like, I've been saying the same thing about the Jets forever. I want to see what Petty and Hackenberg have and not give it to McCown. And honestly, McCown's been fun to watch this year as a Jets fan and given us some hope. But like, I don't want some hope. I want to know who my quarterback of the future is going to be.
Yeah. So like the only thing that I'll say on that is like at this point, I don't know what you're going to find out, honestly. Like what happens in your house when you think you have a burnt out light bulb, you take the light bulb out and you put another one in, but in reality, it's the fixture that's messed up. That other light bulb's not going to work either. So, you know, your whole offensive infrastructure is such a mess right now that you're just putting Davis Webb or Geno Smith or anybody else that you put behind center, you're setting them up for failure. So you're going to look at them for 4 games and say, oh, yeah, they were awful too. Let's move on. So, I mean, to me at that rate, just play Eli.
South, I want to applaud you. That was a fantastic analogy. I loved it. I loved every second of it.
I just kind of popped in my head there. So it could also be the fact that for some reason my light bulb keeps flickering a little bit. So, all right, let's look ahead here to some fantasy football stuff. You know, with the fantasy playoffs on the horizon, we're going to take a look at a handful of players here that you may need to make a difficult decision on coming up in the next few weeks. You know, with these players underachieving, you may have to actually make the call to potentially sit them in favor of a lesser known consistent player. And a lot of times it's hard with guys like we're going to mention because there was a lot of draft capital in them. There was a lot of hype in them. You know, you may have paid a ton of waiver dollars for them. So we're just kind of looking at each situation here and discussing if there's any situation where you would potentially sit them out. The first name that I'm going to bring up is Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. He came out like a total ball of fire in this first 3 games, but he's seriously flamed out since that point. His yardage totals are not awful, obviously, but he has not scored a touchdown since week 3. At this point, are you considering if you have a more consistent option or maybe a more likely option to score at this point, sitting Kareem Hunt, or do you have to kind of ride it out with Kareem Hunt based on the potential at this point?
Well, the good thing with Hunt is you didn't have to have the huge draft capital to take. You know what I mean? Like this wasn't your first round pick. So it's not like a you play your stud scenario. Now, on the reverse side, you know, I know that there are owners out there who probably traded for Hunt and are now kind of stuck having to play him because they needed to make a move mid-season. You made a move for Hunt, and now Hunt hasn't shown up for you. That's a tough situation. But, I mean, honestly, Hunt right now, for me, would be in the situation of I'm looking at whoever my running backs are, and I'm playing best matchup. I'm not playing Kareem Hunt just because he's Kareem Hunt at this point. And it's not even his fault necessarily. That whole offense has gotten so stagnant in the last 5 weeks that it's, you know, it's almost embarrassing. You know what I mean? We were all ready to the co-MVP trophy to Alex Smith and Kareem Hunt after week 5.
All right, well, Rocco's breaking up a little bit there, so I'm going to jump in and kind of throw this out there for you. You know, it's real easy to look at it right now and say, you know, oh man, Kareem Hunt has been pretty awful for me over the last couple of weeks or whatever. But what's important to do here is look over the next couple of weeks, in my opinion. And no one's been really, you know, as hard on Kareem Hunt over the past couple of weeks as I have. But I'll tell you what, I like some of his matchups coming down the stretch here. Now, I don't know if that's something that you can really hang your hat on this point because he did lay a complete egg last week against the Buffalo Bills, who, you know, by all accounts, he should have had a fantastic game against. But, you know, that could be more of a product of just, you know, how things are going for the offense overall right now. So I agree. At this point, for me, I'm a little more optimistic on Kareem Hunt, but I think that he's also a matchup play at this point. You know, if your matchup is Kareem Hunt or Latavius Murray, I'm still probably going to have a really hard time playing Latavius Murray unless his matchup is just like out of this world better. So, you know, don't quite hit the panic button here, but it's definitely worth considering your matchups. All right, let's move on to the next guy here. Let's talk about Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints with just 16 passing touchdowns this year. Obviously, you're probably frustrated if you drafted Drew Brees at this point. This seems to kind of be his production drop-off year. Or, some people are looking at it as they've just decided to run the ball quite a bit more, which is absolutely true. So if you've got an option who is scoring more frequently than Drew Brees, are you going to have the guts at this point to go ahead and start them at fantasy playoff time over Drew Brees?
I'm not. I mean, the arguments are well made, and I understand that he's not doing a whole lot, but I'm just, and I'll kind of, you could ask these questions last week, this week, next week, the next couple weeks. When playoffs are on the line, or if I'm in the playoffs, I'm rolling with Drew Brees because I drafted him because he's still Drew Brees. Like, I definitely, when you watch the Saints play, it's not him, it's them. And that's really evident. And I think there's a lot of numbers drop-offs here where you can point to the player and say, man, his skills have just diminished. But, the Redskins game just 2 weeks ago is a perfect example. Like, they rode the run game, and then they were chasing in the fourth quarter, and he threw 2 touchdowns in 5 minutes.
Right.
Like, the skills are absolutely still there. So if I have Brees, I'm playing him, and in large part, that's just the type of owner I am, where I don't want to cost myself my championship or my playoff game or a playoff berth. Like, I'd rather it be his fault or Sean Payton's fault than, hey, I took Drew Brees as QB4 and, hey, he blew up and threw 4 touchdowns on my bench and I lost. Like, that's just not my thing.
Yeah, I'm a Brees owner right now, and I've got to tell you, I'm not even thinking about putting him on the bench. I've been joking about it.
Right.
We were together over the weekend, and I was joking about how I'll play this person over Brees or whatever, mostly out of just frustration with how that Rams game kind of unfolded.
Sure.
But they've got some tough division matchups left. They still have 2 against the Panthers, which is going to be one of those NFC South kind of slugfests. And I think he's going to have to get back to throwing the ball a little bit in some of those matchups. So honestly, I think that you hit it right on the head. You can't be that guy who has him on your bench and then you lose a fantasy playoff game and everybody's looking at you saying, why did you play Case Keenum over Brees? You know what I mean? Like, he threw 4 touchdowns. It's Drew Brees. So you just kind of have to hope that the game flow is going to get more in your favor, which I happen to think that it will down the stretch here.
I'll say this too. If you drafted Drew Brees, there's a good chance you didn't take a second quarterback right away. You probably waited a little while. So unless you wound up dude who drafted Carson Wentz later on and got lucky with that, whatever you have at quarterback is not going to be any more of a slam dunk than Drew Brees is. Like, it's just more than likely not. And honestly, I love his remaining opponents. He's got the Panthers, who Josh McCown just threw 3 touchdowns on. Yeah, that's Josh McCown. He's got 2 with the Falcons, 1 with the Jets, and 1 with the Bucks. The Bucks are dead last. The Falcons game should be shootouts because they usually are. Like, there's no reason why. I can understand if, like, he had a little bit of a tougher schedule coming down the road. I think this plays really favorable to Drew Brees, just because, one, they need to keep being competitive because they don't have anything locked up yet with that tight division, and 2, the schedule looks great.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like you're kind of trying to, like, subtly give yourself a pat on the back here with that drafting Carson Wentz late thing. So I can't allow that to go by. There's no subtle self.
I didn't think I was subtly dropping anything. I thought I was hammering it in with a nail as hard as I could.
Hammer it. Definitely hammer it. All right, listen, let's talk about another quarterback here, Alex Smith. This one's probably going to go quick because I know how much some people in this room love Alex Smith. Many proclaimed him the fantasy MVP at the halfway point of the season based on how he was playing. Since week 7, he's got 4 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. The Chiefs are obviously trending down. At this point, you can't start Alex Smith, can you?
I just feel so redeemed. Like he flirted with, look how good I am, and I just laughed in the background the whole time.
Yeah, it feels like we were kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop with him all season, doesn't it? I mean, I think it's happened. I don't know. I can't. In my right mind, I would not be able to play Alex Smith in my fantasy playoffs. Not just with the way that things are trending right now, but the fact that over the last couple years, when the Chiefs have gotten into these games that mattered, he's really disappeared. I don't know if that's a product of the way that the games get away from them so quickly or how they're built or whatever, but like he's not even taking any deep shots down the field anymore. That's just not there. I heard an interesting argument on this the other day. He really isn't known for his arm strength to begin with. So maybe now that the weather is getting worse, he's just not able to get it down the field effectively. And maybe it's a lot more dink and dunk and intermediate stuff. So I don't know. Just for fantasy purposes, I feel like you probably didn't count on Alex Smith, as like your number one guy. If you did, I feel bad for you, but you probably have better options.
I think we should just enjoy the fact that Alex Smith is back to being Alex Smith, which means if you need 10 yards, he'll definitely get you 6, maybe 7.
Maybe 7.
On that,
to real life.
On that note, let's move on. All right. Couple players here, wide receivers, that are a lot tougher calls at this point. And let's talk about Jordy Nelson. He's averaging just 21 yards per game since week 6. No touchdowns since week 6. You probably drafted him high, but has the name value just completely worn off at this point on Jordy Nelson, especially without Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, I think at this point, speaking for myself, like I'm not going to tell everybody out there what to do, but if I were a Jordy Nelson owner, which I'm not at all this year, and that was completely by accident. Like I entered the draft with him as a major target of mine.
Same.
And it just didn't. I only drafted him once, and I traded him on draft day. So it just worked out in that sense. But if I owned Jordy Nelson, I would drop him at this point because the temptation is always there to play that guy because he is Jordy Nelson and he is good. Brett Hundley's not very good to begin with. Now, I know he just played really well Sunday night, but he's not throwing the ball to Jordy Nelson. He loves him some Devontae Adams. He loves Randall Cobb. Maybe likes Randall Cobb, loves Adams.
Yep.
He likes checking it down. I mean, I would just straight release Nelson so that I wasn't tempted to play him and his 2-catch, 24-yard performance.
Yeah, it's interesting because
that just seems so crazy.
Yeah, I've seen so much of that same sentiment, though. It's everywhere right now. So many people are just tweeting out there about Jordy Nelson and, screenshots coming out of basically at this point, waiving him for Rex Burkhead, which is right. On the surface insane. But I mean, it's exactly what you're saying, though, is you're adding at least an element to your team that if you're tempted to put into your lineup, you might get some production on in return. It's not happening with Jordy Nelson right now. So another big name wide receiver is Mike Evans. This one's probably, not as drastic out of the 3 names that we're going to mention, but he's not scored since week 7, and he doesn't have a single 100-yard performance at all this year. So Mike Evans, how are you approaching that coming up in fantasy playoffs?
Mike Evans to me is one of the biggest. No, sorry, Ross.
No, good.
I was just gonna say Mike Evans to me is one of the biggest disappointments of the fantasy season. Like this was a top 4, maybe 5 receiver for basically everybody, and he just they're not even ignoring him. They're just not a very good team right now, and without Jameson, it makes it even worse. I mean, Fitzpatrick's accurate, but he's also not trying to take any shots down the field or anything like that. So, I don't know. Listen, Mike Evans, I think you have to play because the potential is there more so than like a Jordy situation. You know what I mean? Like Jordy's not getting passes. Like he's not getting attempts his way. Evans, the attempts are there. They're just not producing. If you bench Evans, the potential for like a 10-catch, 150-yard game is absolutely there. So I think you have to play Evans and just ride that wave out.
So what you're saying is whoever I'm playing in the playoffs is going to have Mike Evans, and they're going to go straight Julio on me like last week.
Right.
Awesome.
Pretty
much. No, I actually agree with your sentiment.
Straight Julio. That's like a different level of life.
That's true. Yeah, I agree with your sentiment on Mike Evans. I feel like what I wrote down is you have to roll the dice and play him. The talent is just too good. And you hit the nail on the head. The targets are still there. Eventually, some of those targets have got to hit. And whereas with Jordy Nelson and, some of these other guys, the targets just aren't there. So eventually it's going to click at some point with Mike Evans. And just like the Breeze argument, I don't want to have him on my bench. So, whatever I can do to still keep him in my lineup and keep faith in him, unless I've got just like world beater options on my bench, which I'm severely doubting, I'm playing Mike Evans at this point. All right, last name that we're going to talk about here is another tricky one. T.Y. Hilton of the Indianapolis Colts. With the exception of one huge game in Week 9 where he ended up scoring twice, he's only got one other touchdown this year. He's got 7 games with 3 or less catches, and he's averaging just 67 yards per game. Is T.Y. Hilton in the same area right now as Jordy Nelson, where you just don't want to be tempted to even get him in your lineup?
He's more in the
I think
Evans.
the worst.
He's more in the Evans camp for me.
Okay.
I'm still playing him because, Jordy, you're hinging on it. His games came in previous years with a different quarterback. T.Y. has had a couple of blowups this year. Now, be smart. Look, they're at Jacksonville this week. I'm probably not touching that with a 10-foot pole, but
right.
If he has a decent matchup, he has shown to be able to explode even with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. So he's a lot closer to what we just said about Mike Evans than what we just said about Jordy Nelson for me.
I would agree that he's in between the two, and I might even lean closer on the side of Evans, except when you look at his next 4 matchups. We'll leave out Week 17 because if you're still playing fantasy football in Week 17, I feel bad for you. But Jaguars, then Bills, but then Broncos, and then Ravens. Pretty tough coming down the stretch, playoff scenario. So I would say that he's 100% matchup based. Well, I'm starting Evans. I'm sitting or cutting Jordy, and I'm looking at the matchup for TY. That's how I would rank these 3 guys. It's like 3 different ways to approach it. You're cutting one, you're done. You're watching the matchup, and you're starting Evans no matter what.
Yeah, I agree with you, which doesn't happen a ton. But considering that you're winning this year a decent amount, I feel like I could actually, get on board with that. And, that's also the opinion that I wrote down. So let's go with it. All right, let's talk about some rapid fire type stories here. We're going to hit on a couple different things here, including some playoff predictions coming up. But let's talk about first, out of this week's biggest waiver wire ads, do any of these names stick out to you as being helpful to your team at all? And you're probably going to notice after I read this list that there's a good reason why we didn't even have a waiver segment this week. We're talking about Rex Burkhead, Jaquiz Rogers, Zay Jones, Cooper Kupp, Corey Coleman are all among the highest ads so far this week for fantasy football. Do any of those names stand out as a player who can help your team at playoff time?
I actually like this list more than some other weeks. Like you're picking on the list.
That's so funny because I was going to say the exact opposite. I said, I've said 1,000 times I'm never touching the Patriots running back situation because you don't know which one it's going to be.
Right.
Quiz is whatever, who knows what they're going to do. Zay Jones was a good play, but Benjamin was out. What happens when Benjamin comes back? I was going to say the only one I do kind of trust on this list is Cooper Kupp because he's been fairly consistent this season. He's not a number 1, but he has been fairly consistent. So, I don't want to say in a pinch, but there are worse matchups out there if that's a position that you struggle at. So that would be, but I hate this list in general.
I can't get enough Cooper Kupp right now.
Yeah.
I can't. Like this week, I own him in a few leagues. He will be in my lineup because he's going to eat. Like, if you don't have a really, really solid slot corner, he's going to destroy you because he's slow, but he's an amazing route runner, and he catches everything near him. So while he may not score a lot, hey, he's a slot. You look at the banging on Julian Edelman for years. What's he going to do? He's going to catch 110 balls and score 4 touchdowns.
Yep.
We make fun of Jarvis Landry for the same thing. This year he's turned that around, but he's that classic slot guy where if you're in a PPR, last week, who was disappointed that they started him? He didn't score a touchdown. What do you have, 11 for 108 or something like that? I mean,
right.
He was out of control. And why? Because the Saints slot corner situation is not good. I want him again this week, and I will start him anytime that third corner is not really, really quick.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that and add to the fact that Robert Woods is probably down this week. So his target share is going up as well, most likely. So I think Cooper Kupp could be a great addition to a playoff roster at this point. I'm also sort of intrigued by Zay Jones. I don't know how quick Kelvin Benjamin's going to come back, and the volume in Buffalo has to go somewhere. I know it's not like a dynamic passing attack by any means, but the targets are going to have to go to a player in Buffalo. And if Zay Jones is that guy, then he's at least worth a look to me. I don't know that I'm necessarily throwing him into my lineup, but if I've got a spot on my roster where there's just, some garbage just sitting there, or maybe like a third defense that I can move on from at this point, you could do a lot worse than Zay Jones, considering the volume he's most likely going to get. All right, the playoff races are heating up, and what once felt like a lock with the Chiefs winning the AFC West doesn't quite seem that way anymore. Who do you guys see winning the AFC West? And just as a disclaimer, we kind of went back through and did, playoff machine or playoff predictor. So this isn't just kind of like throwing something against the wall to see what sticks. We kind of played this out. So let's see how this worked out.
Yeah, and I'll throw them. I mean, just before I'll throw them a bone. That NFLPlayoffPredictor.com is an amazing site for anyone looking to kill some time.
Yep.
I mean, it literally comes out as soon as the schedule's released, and you can pick every game. It auto-calculates standings, tiebreakers, all that stuff. So it's great for use on this kind of thing, but if you're just bored and need something to do, it's a great time.
Don't do it at work because you will be sucked into it for life.
Yeah, there's no more work getting done. So, but to answer the question, I actually have the Chargers winning the division at 9-7. I have the Chiefs fading to 8-8 and actually missing the playoffs entirely.
I have the exact same thing. I have the Chiefs sitting at 8-8 and the Chargers winning the playoffs, winning the division.
Wow, I also have the Chargers overtaking them, but I have it a little bit more competitive down the stretch here. I think Oakland is going to kind of fade a little bit here, so they're going to kind of be like a little bit of a doormat for these teams down the stretch. I have the Chargers at 10-6 and the Chiefs at 9-7 and missing the playoffs. And we'll get to why they missed the playoffs in my scenario, which is probably going to make me look like a total knucklehead. But I do that every week anyway, so why not? It's just crazy to think about with the way that the Chiefs started out this season, that they could potentially, in you guys' scenario, win 8 games and mine win 9, and their season is over. Like, they're not getting a playoff game.
Right.
What happens in Kansas City if that's the case?
Definitely the Pat Mahomes era. I mean, I know you're kind of fishing for Andy, and I don't think I don't know. I'm not sure what direction they'd go there. It's probably tough as a front office to swallow 5-0 to missing the playoffs entirely. But the only thing I'll say unqualifiedly is it's the Pat Mahomes era, no matter what. Yeah,
that's more what I was fishing for than anything. I don't know that the coach is going anywhere because I think you want Andy there to groom Mahomes,
right?
Coming up here.
Yeah.
So, But I do agree. I think that it's definitely Pat Mahomes' time.
Yeah, Andy's not going anywhere. Like you're not going to find a better replacement in the NFL than Andy Reid. Like, let's not forget, like this guy has consistently done in Kansas City what most people couldn't do anywhere. So, but yeah, the Mahomes era is in place. It's a little unfair. I mean, the defense, they really took a step back this year from what they have been in the past. But again, injuries, depleted front lines, Berry in the back hurts a ton. That's as big of an injury to a defense that one can have. So, yeah, I think Andy's safe. I definitely think we've seen the last of Alex Smith after this season if they don't make the playoffs. Maybe even if they do.
All right, in the AFC South, both the Titans and the Jaguars are 7-4 at this point. Who wins that division? And do you see the team who doesn't win it getting a wild card spot?
Yeah, that's exactly the way I have it playing out. I have the Titans winning the division at 11-5, and I have the Jaguars making the 5 seed at 10-6.
I have them both at 11-5. Jags winning the tiebreaker. Tennessee getting a wild card.
I'm right there with Rocco with Tennessee at 11-5, taking the 3 seed, and the 5 seed Jaguars at 10-6. I feel like we've kind of been waiting for the other shoe to drop with the Jaguars too all season, but it's really not happening. Like even last week with Leonard Fournette, struggling and trying to overcome this injury that he's dealing with, all of a sudden Blake Bortles has 2 rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, like it just feels like everything's kind of coming together and things are just falling in place for them as they need to. So this is going to be an interesting race down to the end between these two teams for sure.
Even though I have the Jaguars win the wild card, you said we've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't think it's going to drop because that team is now run by that defense. Like, and it's been so long since that defense was anything at all. You know what I mean? Like they always had some offensive weapons, but their defense couldn't stop anybody. So every game was a shootout that you were losing. That defense is one of the top 2 or 3 defenses in the league right now. Like the other shoe's not going to drop because that's what they are now. I just think that honestly, it's going to come down to who you think is going to win week 17.
Right.
That's how it played out for me. I have them both losing one more time and then the Titans beating them week 17.
Yeah. And here's a little bit of an interesting thing to ponder too. Like we're looking at a Jaguars team that kind of fell off the map last year, bounced right back this season by rebuilding the defense, establishing the run. In Rocco and I's scenario, they're going to be a 5 seed going to the friendly confines of Los Angeles to play the Chargers. So it's not totally unrealistic to see them go in there and win a playoff game on the road either.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, the NFC South is a division that is super intriguing at this point. Obviously, the Saints and Panthers are currently at 8-3. The Falcons are surging at 7-4. Who wins the division, and how many teams do you see from this division getting into the playoffs?
I have the Saints winning the division at 12-4, and I have the Falcons making the wild card in the 5 spot at 10-6. And the Panthers also at 10-6, but losing out on tiebreakers to the other teams and being in the 7th spot.
Yeah, the same situation, a little bit different on the records. I have the Saints and Falcons both at 11-5, but New Orleans won my tiebreaker there to get the 3 seed, Atlanta getting the 5. And I have Carolina at 10-6, missing the playoffs as well.
Yeah, it's almost identical across the board here, with the exception of the records. I do have the Saints at 12-4. I've got Atlanta at 11-5, and they face off in the first round in New Orleans, which would be a fantastic game. Mm-hmm. And then the Panthers at 10-6 are sitting home when in the AFC they'd probably be in
2 seed.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be hosting a playoff game in the wild card, but that's just the kind of year that it is right now in the NFC. And we'll kind of break out our seeds as a recap at the end of this point. But 2 more things we want to hit on. The AFC teams that are on the bubble right now. I'm not counting teams that are mathematically alive as on the bubble. I'm counting teams that are legitimately within striking distance here. So of these teams, the Bills, the Bengals, the Raiders, do you see any of those teams realistically getting into the playoffs?
I don't have any of them in. I had Bills and Bengals both at 7-9, Raiders at 8-8. My wild cards, I had already said about Tennessee, and I have the Ravens getting in at 9-7.
Yeah, I also have the Ravens getting in only at 10-6, and then I have the Raiders, Bills, Bengals, Chiefs, and Bengals, Bills, Raiders, and Chiefs all bundled up together in that 9-7, 8-8 range. So I don't think the schedule is too tough for those three opponents, for those three teams going forward, that they can't. I mean, essentially, for one of them to get in, they'd have to win out, and I don't see that happening.
Yeah, same here. I don't have any of them getting in, but I do have the Bills at 9-7. Just narrowly missing. I do think that they're going to play well down the stretch here, just not going to be good enough. And what I thought was going to make me look like a knucklehead in having Baltimore as my 6th seed at 9-7, certainly not looking as bad right now, considering that we all did the same thing. So let's recap the AFC seeds. So for me, I've got New England as the 1 at 14-2, Pittsburgh as the 2, 13-3. 3 seed is Tennessee, 11-5. The number 4 is the Chargers at 10-6. Then my wild cards are Jacksonville at 10-6 and Baltimore at 9-7. So, Rock, give us who you had as your seeds as a recap.
Everything the same as you, except I have the Ravens at 10-6. So literally every record the same. Just one game off on the Ravens.
Crazy. Miles.
I have the Pats at 14-2, taking it the number 1 seed. Steelers getting a bye at 12-4. Jags 11-5. Chargers 9-7. Hosting games against the Titans at 11-5 and the Ravens at 9-7.
All right, so largely same teams in the AFC. So basically, all that tells us is that something screwy is sure to happen, and Cincinnati gets a playoff spot.
Right.
Or Buffalo ends the drought.
Well,
nah, that's not gonna happen.
No. All right, last one here. NFC teams on the bubble: Seahawks, Lions, Packers, Cowboys, Redskins, Cards, all within realistic reach. Do any of them get in your scenario?
I actually have maybe a shocker, but I have Seattle at 10-6 winning the NFC West.
Wow.
The rest of those teams, I think according to my calculations here, it takes 10 wins to get in. I have Green Bay and Washington at 9-7, Detroit and Dallas 8-8, Arizona 7-9. So none of those get in. But I do have Seattle still winning a division.
I also have Seattle winning the division at 11-5, actually. And then the other three, the rest of the group is 10-6 or lower. None of them even getting above the 8 or 9 seed in the West, in the NFC. So, yeah, I'm out. I'm in on the Seahawks like Miles, but I'm out on everybody else.
I have got the Seahawks at 11-5, sitting at home.
Wow.
Watching the playoffs because the Detroit Lions take the 6th seed, the wild card, at 11-5. The Rams hang on 12-4 and keep the division. So I'll give you my recap here. The number 1 is Philadelphia at 14-2. Just to throw it out there, I do think that because of this West Coast swing, I think the Rams get them. So I think that's where their second loss comes in. Minnesota, the number 2 at 12-4. 3rd seed is the Rams at 12-4. The 4th seed is the Saints at 12-4. So if you want to play at home in the playoffs in the NFC, you better win 12 games. Crazy. Number 5 is Atlanta at 11-5, and 6 is Detroit at 11-5, sneaking in there.
Wow. I'll jump in. I've got Philadelphia at 13-3 getting in. I agree with you that I think the Rams get them, and I actually think they lose to the Cowboys week 17 because, they might call me to play. My second seed is actually the Vikings, 11-5. I have the Saints at 11-5 and Seattle at 10-6, hosting wild card games against the 11-5 Falcons and the 10-6 Rams.
I also have the Eagles as the number 1 seed at 14-2. I kind of feel a little bit different about it. I think they take care of business the next 3 weeks, and the only game they lose is week 17 when they're not trying to play football. That's just the realistic part of it now. The Vikings and the 2 seed at 13-3, which is another reason why I think the Eagles are going to play hard through the next couple of weeks because the Vikings are right there on their heels. So. Saints, the 3 seed at 12-4, Seahawks, the 4 seed at 11-5, and they will be hosting playoff games against the 10-6 Falcons and the 10-6 Rams. All 3 of them bunched up with the Panthers, and the Falcons and Rams win the tiebreakers.
All right, so there you have it. That's how we see the playoff races shaking out over the next couple weeks here. Again, we ran those through the actual, playoff predictor sites, which we do not suggest that you do while at work. I repeat, do not do that while at work. Okay, I may get myself in a lot of trouble if I ever get caught messing around with that while I'm waiting for reports to load, but it's a lot of fun. So, all right, let's take a quick pause here to talk about our friends at Gorb. That's GHORBH. You may have seen all of a sudden, we've been tweeting with the hashtag Gorb. You've seen all these different advertisements, all these different, really sharp, handsome, pretty people with all their Gorb gear on. All of a sudden, it's kind of taking over social media. And the cool thing about it, and I'll keep it 100 with you guys right now. There's a lot of times when I just do not feel like doing things. Sometimes the last thing I want to do is put together something for a podcast or, edit something or whatever. But then I remember the mission of Gorb, and that's to either get hungry or be hungry. Like for those of you watching, I got this awesome hoodie on right now. It's hoodie season. It's stylish. It's comfortable. It reminds me to get hungry or be hungry. And that reminder gives me that little kick to remember that ultimately I got to keep pushing and trying to get the things done that I really am passionate about. I can't just give up on it. And that's what you get is that constant reminder of the mission statement. You could check them out at GHORBH.com. You could see the speech that kicked this whole thing off. It was an amazing commencement speech. I suggest that you absolutely do check it out. And then while you're there, you could get some awesome gear, hoodies, t-shirts, all kinds of accessories, men, women, kids, anybody that could be looking for anything in any size, color, style. It's all there. They've got something to make every member of the family look great, even Rocco. Check it out at GHORBH.com. Get hungry or be hungry. All right, guys, it's time to talk about our goons and ghosts. Obviously, our goons are the guys that we're expecting to outperform a little bit of a lower ranking heading into this week. And our ghosts are guys that we think are going to underperform and might be ranked a little bit higher heading into this week. So we're going to break it down for you, and we're going to give you our players for this week. I'll also just mention in passing the players that Deal had picked for this week. He's not here with us this week, but we will mention his players just to kind of keep that on track as well. So let's start out with the goons. Miles, why don't you give us who you've got?
Yeah, I'm going with Jacksonville wide receiver D.D. Westbrook this week as my goon. He's pre-ranked wide receiver number 45. D.D.'s about to come into his 3rd career game. He's enjoyed 16 targets in his 2 games since coming off IR, including leading the team with 10 this past week. He's certainly still working on his timing with Blake Bortles, which seems like a very difficult task. So on that one, but his talent is undeniable, and I love the matchup here against Colts defense that's given up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. The last time Jacksonville went up against Indy this year, they had 3 wide receivers go over 50 yards. Westbrook got more targets last week than any of those 3 did in that Week 7 game. So I like him to kind of keep that target roll going and match the output that was put up by his video room mates there. I like D.D. to haul in 7 passes, 110 yards, and his first career touchdown this week, making him a startable player if you're in a spot where you need to reach a bit, which, let's be honest, Some of us are. So go ahead. Don't fear TD this week.
All right, Rocco, who do you got for us as your goon this week?
I also hit up the wide receiver pool, and I went Washington Redskins wide receiver Josh Doctson, ranked wide receiver 31. I feel as though this kind of might be the end of seeing him ranked this low, though. All he's done the last couple of weeks is go out and build up a nice little rapport with Captain Kirk. We saw that come to a head last Thursday night against the Giants, in which Kirk looked for him game for the go-ahead touchdown. Listen, there's a reason why they drafted him in the first round. Okay, this is exactly what they were hoping for, and we're seeing that a little bit more each week. He's already produced 4 touchdowns this season, and with a Cowboys team that's really struggled to find their identity since the loss of Zeke Elliott and Sean Lee on both offense and defense. I like the Redskins to try and take advantage of this, keep their playoffs hopes alive, and also sink the Cowboys at the same time. And the best way to do that is to let Kirk be Kirk. And lately, that involves Josh Doctson pretty heavily. So I like Josh Doctson this week. I think he's way higher than his number 31 output. I like him 5 catches for 93 yards and a score.
All right, and my goon this week is Isaiah Crowell, running back of the Cleveland Browns. Look, he's gotten me in trouble before for jumping on the Crowell train, and it derails before it really gets any momentum. I'm taking another shot at it here, all right? I was high on him this offseason. I was trying to get stock in him. Really, to be honest, it has not worked out so far to this point, but all that matters is the here and now. The Chargers are one of 3 teams who've already surrendered 1,200 rushing yards on the ground this season. And in fact, they've given up the most rushing yards on the ground of any team this season, in addition to 6 touchdowns against them. The 6 touchdowns are probably not a huge deal on paper, considering that, we're heading into week 13, but the rushing touchdowns have mostly come over the last 3 weeks. Teams are realizing that pass rush is just absolutely dominant and that they can kind of gash them while they're getting up the field after the quarterback. So they've given up 300 yards in their last 3 games on the ground exactly. Crowell is 90-plus yards on the ground in 2 of his last 3 and a touchdown to go with it. The receptions have actually cranked up a little bit over the past 4 weeks as well, which is an interesting element considering they have Duke Johnson. He scored twice last year against a nearly identical Chargers defense, probably a little bit more injured at that point, but I still really like this matchup for him this week. I think that he gets 19 carries, 106 yards, and a touchdown, improves him from running back 27, where he's currently pre-ranked. Isaiah Crowell is my goon for this week. We'll mention as well, Deal is gooning Kenny Stills of the Miami Dolphins this week. He's wide receiver 52 heading into his contest this week. All right, let's talk about our ghosts. Rocco, you're going to lead us off here on this one. Who are you ghosting this week?
So apparently me and South are thinking way too alike this week because I also went to the Browns-Chargers game to find my ghost. I'm ghosting Keenan Allen this week. His ranking is a little high at wide receiver 3, and I don't just mean a little high. I just mean a little high for this game because Keenan is having the season that we all thought he could have if he could just stay on the field. Miles has been in love with this guy since day one, and he's showing us all why. He's currently 7th in the league in receptions, 5th in yards. He's having a great season. But this week they play the Browns, and although that screams blowout to a lot of people, I think it will be a blowout, but I think that means that he's going to be very limited. I think they're going to be spending a lot of time running the ball, playing keep away from the Browns, and trying to milk this clock because they're going to be ahead so early. I feel that way for one. Right now, they're right back in the playoff hunt, and that means that they need to keep the train rolling. They're on a really hot streak right now, and they know they can catch the Chiefs. 2, are definitely not looking past this game in any way, shape, or form because they do not want to be the Browns' only W in a row. That will not happen. That will not happen. The Chargers will not let that happen. I guarantee it. I see this game getting out of hand quickly, and then turning to a rush fest for the Los Angeles Chargers. How many times do you think I'm going to do that before I actually just stop calling them San Diego? It'll probably be a long time. But no, I like Keenan a lot. I just think this week, given the situation, I don't like him for wide receiver 3 production. I think he could have a very solid 6-catch, 85, 90-yard performance, no touchdowns, and that's not good enough for wide receiver 3 this week.
All right, my ghost this week is AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals. Kind of an unpopular pick from what I'm seeing out there, but he is wide receiver number 6 this week. The outlets that are ranking him there are really, really standing by that. And I'm not sure that I understand that. The Steelers are the 5th best team defense against fantasy wide receivers so far in 2017. Very few people have really gotten theirs against them. Green has 6 touchdowns in 12 career games against the Steelers, but 4 of those came in the first 6 that he ever played. So 2/3 of his touchdowns came in the first 6 games. He's only got 2 since. He's been shut down at 41 yards in the first game that they played this year. If you go back to the last 2 games that they played against the Steelers, he's averaging 39 yards. So the Steelers are making it a point to take AJ Green out of the passing attack, eliminate him from hurting them. You'll see a lot of safety right over the top, a lot of double coverage on him with what the Steelers like to do with AJ Green. I'm just not buying in. This is an opportunity, if you're the Steelers, to really bury the Bengals, who are a division rival, who could kind of be a thorn in your side over the past couple of years, even though you've beaten them, and really just kind of like shovel the last little bit of dirt on their 2017 season grave. So I think they're going to take every opportunity to just put this team away, and they're going to take AJ Green out of the game completely to make sure that he is not the person who potentially causes them headaches this week. They should shut him down again like they have the last 2 games they played. I'll give him 6 catches for 57 yards and no scores out of AJ Green this week. He is my ghost. Deal's ghost this week is Kareem Hunt, who we spoke about in detail earlier on in the podcast. He's currently ranked at running back number 12 this week. Miles, who are you ghosting?
Yeah, I'm going to go with tight end of the Seattle Seahawks, Jimmy Graham, who's coming in pre-ranked tight end number 4 against the Eagles. He's going up against this defense, and the Eagles are right in the middle of the pack overall against tight end. They're 14th best. However, and I know you can't always do this, but if you take away Travis Kelce's 8-catch, 103, 1-touchdown performance all the way back in week 2, which seems like years ago when he and the Chiefs were unstoppable, this year in the other 10 games, only 2 other tight ends have scored on the Eagles, and 2 have over 45 yards. In fact, no tight end has even recorded multiple catches against the Eagles since week 7, which is crazy. You're talking about 5 straight games with 1 catch for a tight end. Jimmy himself he's been solid this year, but he's very, very, very touchdown reliant, which most tight ends tend to be. But he actually hasn't topped 60 yards since week 4. He's scoring well because they're throwing it to him in the end zone. But I think the Eagles have what it takes at the linebacker position to keep him out of the end zone. And I honestly think it might be a game where Seattle needs to keep Jimmy Graham in to chip a little bit to keep this pass rush off of Russell Wilson. With all of that coming in, I like Jimmy Graham to hit his usual 4, maybe 5 catches for about 45 yards, which will be okay for you in a PPR, but he's not going to score, and that keeps him nowhere near his tight end 4 pre-rank.
All right, let's talk about daily fantasy football. Obviously, what we're looking to do with picking a value player for you in daily fantasy is finding a guy who's not going to cost you as much as some of those top options at the position heading into this week. It'll save you a little bit of money in your budget to be able to go ahead and get one of those more expensive players or spend a little bit more on one position that you think is going to be dominant as a star player this week. So we dig down a little bit deeper here, and that's the goal, is to get you a good return for considerably less. I'll start it out this week. My daily fantasy value this week is Dion Lewis of the New England Patriots. Makes absolutely no sense to go ahead and pick Dion Lewis on the surface after Rex Burkhead had the game that he had last week. But Rocco said earlier, you never know what's going to happen with the New England backfield, except for the fact that Dion Lewis has gotten the most consistent touches out of anybody in that Patriots backfield this season. He's averaging 15 carries per game since week 6. He's got 3 touchdowns since week 6. His volume certainly should be there against the Buffalo Bills this weekend, who are the 3rd worst rushing defense in the NFL as we speak right now. They've got the most rushing touchdowns surrendered at 13 this season. They've got the 5th most yards surrendered to running backs as well. They've given up 60 receptions to running backs this year. So you kind of see the theme I'm going with here. They're giving up a lot to running backs this year. Dion Lewis is getting the most touches out of those backs from New England. So it seems to be lining up to me that he should be in line for a pretty good game. I've made no bones about it. I've always liked his skill set. I've always favored him. Another quick thing I want to throw out here that may actually make you really scratch your head. The Bills in the last 5 games have given up 10 rushing touchdowns. That's 2 per game over their last 5 games. They are really not good against opposing running backs. I like him to get 16 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown. Add 4 catches for 41 yards to that, and you're going to have a fantasy bonanza out of Dion Lewis this week in daily fantasy. $6,300 is all it'll cost you. You got to go with Dion Lewis. And I will mention that Deal has highlighted for $5,200 touchdown Tommy Savage at number 36 overall as his daily value this week. So I'm sure that he had more fun creating the nickname than anything else. So, all right, Miles, who do you got for us as your daily value this week?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it kind of short and sweet here with Adrian Peterson, running back for the Cardinals. He's at $6,400 on FanDuel. He's coming off a pretty solid performance, but more importantly, 24 touches against the Texans on Sunday. Facing a Rams defense that's giving up 112 yards per game on the ground and have allowed 13 total touchdowns to running backs this season, resulting in the 2nd most fantasy points allowed to the position. Hit the ball like crazy, even when it's not really working. The Rams have allowed a 22 or more point running back in back-to-back weeks. This just feels like a perfect storm to me for Adrian Peterson against the Rams for $6,400.
All right, Rocco, you've got the last word in daily value this week. Who do you got?
So when I originally put this together, I said that this was a situation that you wanted to keep your eye on because no decision had actually been made. But within the last 2 to 3 hours, the decision has been made, and it makes me look like even more of a genius. I say save your money at quarterback this week. Garoppolo, quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, for $6,300. Listen, the 49ers couldn't get any worse than C.J. Beathard's 201-yard, no TD, two turnover performance. So it only makes sense to hand the reins over to Jimmy and start looking at what your future looks like. I know it's garbage time. You can say what you want, but Jimmy came in and threw a touchdown pass in like 47 seconds. He's just better than C.J. Beathard is, okay? And that offense needs help, and Jimmy Garoppolo is the guy to do it. Now, listen, Jimmy cost you a low $6,300 this week to play in the toilet bowl brought to you by Taco Bell against the 3-8 Chicago Bears and the 1-10 San Francisco 49ers. But at $6,300, that's $3,000 less than Tom Brady, the top quarterback, and the guy that Jimmy used to back up. Less than the next group of quarterbacks who are all in that $8,300 range. You know, the Wentzes and the Russell Wilsons and the Cam Newtons and the Drew Breeses of the world. All that extra cash just allows you to throw money at these big-name running backs and wide receivers that are going to help you win big bucks in FanDuel this week. I like a very conservative safe game from Jimmy Garoppolo. 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I don't think he's going to turn the ball over. And for $6,300, it's not a ton of points, but that point per dollar is going to be a lot better than the quarterbacks at the $9,300 range. So that's where I'm going this week with my money.
All right, well, that's it for this week's edition of the show. We want to wish you guys good luck on your playoff pushes, as most leagues, Week 13 is the last week of the fantasy football regular season. Be sure to stay tuned to footballgoons.com for all of our updates each and every week, including Miles's power rankings, which come out midweek every single week. You don't want to miss those. Those are always a really good read. Lots of good information and opinions in there about where your team is at and where they're heading over the next couple weeks. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Footballgoons.com is the only place to get it. The only place to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/footballgoons. On the Twitter, we are at footballgoons. And right here live every Tuesday night on our YouTube channel, you can connect with us as well. You could leave comments. You can subscribe. We'll get back to you on those comments as soon as we can on any social media platform, because we realize that interacting with you, the Football Goons community, is really what it's all about. We'll catch you guys next time.